Hey everybody, welcome to Supplementary video 4.2 to 4.6. In this video we're going to be talking about tissues. We're going to be adding on to some of the discussion that we had on tissues in the high school portion of this video, or of this unit. So we're going to start with epithelia, which is going to be the main focus of this overall unit, the integumentary system. Epithelial tissue has very little extracellular space. They're going to have tight junctions, they can have anchoring junctions, or they can have gap junctions, but they're going to form these connections with the adjacent cells, and just overall they're going to be known as a cell junction. Since there's very little extracellular space, all of them are going to have this connection because they're going to be very near other cells. They're going to show a difference depending on if they are on the apical surface or if they are a basal epithelia. So the apical epithelial cells are going to be those that are near the whatever you might be exposed to. So for your skin, that's going to be the external environment. That might be in your digestive system. That might be what's exposed to the actual cavity, the lumen of your digestive system. Might be towards the inside of a blood vessel. That's all going to be the exposed portion. Those are going to be the apical surfaces, and basal are going to be the opposite. Epithelia will be attached to connective tissue, usually deep to it, by some sort of basement membrane that's composed of a basal lamina, which is produced from the epithelia, and a reticular lamina, which is going to be produced from the connective tissue. Epithelial tissue can also make endocrine hormones and exocrine glands. So endocrine hormones are going to be hormones essentially that they're released, but they stay within the body. Exocrine glands stay, or I should say that those exocrine, those hormones are going to be produced within the body, but they end up being released outside of the body. This does include those things that are going to be secreted to like the lumen of the digestive system, since the very center is technically considered an outside part of the body. Exocrine glands, they can use a couple of different secretion types. They can be merocrine, which is going to be where they're going to use exocytosis, where they have some sort of substance within them, and then they're basically going to have that vesicle merge with the cell membrane, and then they're going to spit it out on the apical surface. Apocrine, these are going to be where basically the entire apical surface is ripped off, and then at holocrine, the entire cell is going to burst open, and that cell is not going to be good anymore. So here you can see that merocrine, holocrine, and apocrine here. Merocrine, exocytosis to release whatever they are secreting. Apocrine, the entire apical surface gets pinched off, gets ripped off, and then holocrine, the entire cell explodes to release that product. And then here you can see some of the junctions, the tight junction, the gap junction, and the anchoring junctions that are available that epithelial tissues or epithelial cells will show. Connective tissue, and one of the other four tissue types, they're going to produce lots and lots of extracellular fluid. That extracellular fluid with the connective tissue, that's going to be called the matrix. We'll call the major component is the ground substance. We'll see some of that here on the next slide. Connective tissue arises from the mesoderm, so that middle layer in the embryo, and there's lots of different types of connective tissue based on the ground substance and the fibers that they possess. The connective tissue proper, which is what it's called, is going to include loose tissue, which includes areolar, adipose, and reticular connective tissue, and dense connective tissue, which includes regular, elastic, and irregular tissues. Supportive connective tissue includes the different types of cartilage, hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic, as well as bone. Your fluid connective tissue includes blood and lymph, which is really weird to think that blood is a connective tissue. And you can see some of the pictures here. Adipose tissue is very, very faint. Lipids are kind of a whitish, maybe just a faint yellow. Lots and lots of lipids get stored in these adipocytes here. You can see reticular fibers, very pretty purple once they are stained. Up here you can see some different fibrocytes and adipocytes, and a diagram of that here. Over on this side, this is blood. So these are all red blood cells, erythrocytes here, with one single white blood cell in the middle. Remember, white is a type, or blood is a type of connective tissue. You have these regular dense and irregular dense. Regular dense, they're going to look very patterned or very smooth. Irregular dense are not going to be. And then you have your hyaline cartilage here. So the pictures on the right are actual stained images using a microscope, and on the left here are just kind of diagrams. But this is hyaline, fibrocartilage, and your elastic cartilage. Muscular tissue, they're excitable, which means they're going to respond to a stimulus. They're contractile, meaning they're able to shorten, and they're elastic, which means after you stretch them, they're going to return back to their normal shape. Kind of like a lot like a rubber band in terms of the elastic. So if you stretch a rubber band, it's going to snap back to its normal length unless it gets pulled too far. And then that it loses its elasticity, just like when you pull a muscle, and it takes some time to be able to heal that. Muscular tissue can fall into one of three categories. You have skeletal, and those that tissue is going to have cells that are very long, they're cylindrical, and they're striated, meaning they have stripes running down them from alternating thick and thin filaments within them, the actin and myosin. Skeletal muscle is also going to be responsible for producing movement and heat. Cardiac muscle tissue, those muscle cells are very short and they're branched. They are also striated, and obviously they're going to be useful for pumping blood in your heart. And then you have smooth muscle tissue. Those cells are very short. They're spindle shaped, so kind of like a exaggerated football shape, and they do not have striations. They do have actin and myosin, but they are not organized in straight lines like they are in skeletal and cardiac muscle. And smooth muscle is going to be a lot of your digestive organs and things like that, which are producing movement. So you can see here the differences between your skeletal, your cardiac, and your smooth muscle. And then lastly, we have nervous tissue, which can send and receive electrochemical signals. Nervous tissue can fall under the category of a neuron or neuroglia. Neurons are going to be the actual cells when we think of nervous tissue that are sending and receiving info. Neuroglia are simply going to be cells that are supporting the neurons, essentially. And I say simply, even though they are conducting a very important role. Neurons will have dendrites, which are will be the ends that are receiving information. They'll have axons wrapped in myelin running along the length of the neuron, and then the axons will branch and end in axon terminals, which is going to be the direction that information is being sent away. Neuroglia, otherwise known as glial cells. You have lots of different types of glial cells. You have your astrocytes, microglia, oligodendrocytes, as well as your Schwann cells. Move myself out of the way here. You can see a general picture of a neuron here with the dendrites here. Remember, these are receiving information. So once an impulse is received here, it will travel through the cell body here and down the axon, and then it will end in these axon terminals here. They'll connect to some other cell. And they're not diagrammed here, but usually the axon is wrapped in myelin, which is just a very fatty substance which allows the impulse to travel much, much faster. And here you can see different neuroglia. You have your astrocytes, named because they kind of look like they're shaped like stars. Your microglial cells here, the myelin sheath being produced by the oligodendrocytes. And then a little bit to talk about tissue injury as well as the aging and repair process. When you are injured, damaged cells, especially mast cells, are going to release histamine, which causes vasodilation. Vaso meaning vessel, dilation meaning widening. So this is the widening of blood vessels, which is going to cause redness as well as heat in the area. Because you have all that blood flowing to that certain area because the blood vessels are wider, and so blood is very warm. So that's where you get the redness, and that's where you get the heat. White blood cells will appear at the area, and they're going to, the white blood cells and liquid will move blood into the interstitial space, which is going to cause edema, swelling. So not only do you have the white blood cells, you have this liquid. Usually it can be very, very watery. Sometimes it is blood, but it can end up in the interstitial space. And when you get that, remember the interstitial space is extracellular fluid that is outside of a blood vessel, and so that's going to cause the swelling just from all that extra liquid in the area. Swelling and prostaglandins are going to squeeze your pain receptors. We'll go over pain receptors in a different video, which causes pain. Different things like NSAIDs, which includes ibuprofen, they're going to inhibit the production of prostaglandins. And so when you take ibuprofen, it's going to travel to those cells that are producing the prostaglandins. It's going to inhibit those prostaglandins, and so now that you don't have prostaglandins being produced, your body is not recognizing that you are in any pain. Clotting is going to close the wound. It's going to stop blood loss. It is slowly going to be replaced as those cells regenerate. Epithelial tissue is very good at regenerating. Nervous tissue is not. So it depends on what type of tissue you have that's damaged. And as you age, tissues are going to atrophy, which means they lose mass. Usually it's because you have this loss of elasticity, so your skin doesn't snap back quite as well, or you just have loss of fluid, you have loss of mass in that area, and so you start to atrophy and you start getting smaller in those tissues. So here you can see some of the injury and repair process here. Where you have the clotting occurs by clotting proteins. We'll go over them, I believe, in our cardiopulmonary unit. But you have these histamines being released, white blood cells traveling to the area, then getting tied up by these fibroblasts, and eventually you'll get the scar tissue. The epithelial tissue will regenerate. Eventually that scar will be able to fade away because this epithelial tissue is repairing itself. Okay. So that is supplementary video 4.2 to 4.6. If you have any questions on that, make sure you're letting me know. Again, this is just adding on to some of the tissue discussion that we had in an earlier video.